Be strong.
At this point, Li-han immediately felt that he was probably the only one who felt that way. He still sat in that corner and felt that he was the only one being beaten the most. After a few rounds of fencing, Engeldel now stepped forward as if he had something to say. He called Li-han to stand up. Hearing that, he also stood up as he said. Li-han just went to Engeldel and wondered. At this moment he called Durgu of the Choi family. He didn't say anything at this point, just let things continue to see how the situation turned out. Durgu of the Choi family also slowly walked towards Engeldel. Li-han looked at him and realized that this was the person who caused trouble with him, so why did he go to Durgu? Both Li-han and Durgu just looked at each other without saying anything. At this point Engeldel said that the two would compete against each other. When they heard him declare that, the remaining students couldn't stop shouting. Some students wondered why it was Li-han and Durgu, wondering if that was fair or not. The corner of Durgu's mouth now slightly raised. He laughed as if he were mocking him. Durgu did not hesitate and agreed to compete with Li-han. Engeldel gave each of them a wooden sword. He saw the arrogant and victorious look on his face. Li-han saw that he seemed very happy to know that Li-han was his opponent. He firmly held the sword and determined that everything had come to this and he had no intention of retreating. Li-han also said that he could have used this time to have fun and dance, but he did not do so, but instead chose to be beaten continuously and study swordsmanship seriously. Li-han's face was also full of confidence and he thought that what he sacrificed was in exchange for this moment. The reason Professor Engeldel chose them. Simply because these are the two most elite individuals. Swordsmanship is not just theory, but also 100 times of practice and 1,000 times of actual combat. Only by going through all of that can one truly grasp swordsmanship. Only after going through all of that can one truly grasp swordsmanship. For a simple example, let's say there is a move that hits the opponent directly in the neck. But if you only know how to attack, victory is still very far away. Use theory as the core, then add fluency and customization. We will see what real swordsmanship is. These two students not only understand that rule, but also have the ability to use magic to enhance their swordsmanship. They have natural talent to become knights. At this time, Professor Engeldel spoke up and told Li-han and Durgu to return to their positions. Engeldel looked at him for a moment. He kept looking and thinking a few things about him, which was his swordsmanship ability, even though he didn't come from a knightly lineage. But the pressure he was under from his family must have been terrible, but he kept moving forward steadfastly. Engeldel felt he deserved to be a commended student. He also wanted to guide you to the pinnacle of swordsmanship. Without saying much more, he officially opened the match. Engeldel looked and thought this match was worth watching. The Choi family's Peak Moon Sword favors attack speed and tempo. On the other hand, Bluestone swordsmanship pays attention to the power of each attack. When analyzing the strengths of each family, Engeldel also said that the two schools are completely opposite and the two people will learn many things from the other, and according to him, this is the true meaning of the two words, defense. Durgu started walking forward. He looked and asked Li-han if he wasn't planning on going up. Li-han did not answer but silently looked at him. Seeing that he had no response, Durgu quickly rushed forward to attack first. He ran up to Li-han and gently let down a sword strike. The tip of Durgu's sword was right in front of Li-han, which scared him. His feet quickly sank to the ground. And without further hesitation, Li-han immediately counterattacked, swinging the sword in his hand, causing sand to fly all over Durgu's face. Because sand was flying all over his face, he couldn't bear it, so he closed his eyes tightly and coughed a few times in discomfort. Li-han's last move surprised the other students so much that they were sure to wonder if it was a sand-throwing move or not. A student quickly went up to ask Engeldel if that move was against the rules or not. Engeldel not only did not say that it was against the rules, but also constantly praised the wonderful method. When the other student heard that, he was stunned and wondered why. Durgu looked at Li-han covered in dirt. Engeldel continued to talk more about this match. He said that it was regardless of both means and methods. This is a real life and death match. And looking at the way Li-han was flexible and graceful in each rhythm of the match, Engeldel was certain that he was the one who understood that better than anyone else. Then he looked at the other students and said that for them this was still very far away. Seeing that the students were constantly assuming that it was Li Han who cheated, he was even more certain that it was because they all came from a family where honor came first, so not knowing was natural. However, and moreover, Li Han also has the mindset of ignoring the nonsense around him to focus on the goal of victory. And that confirmed that Li Han is a true swordsman. Dergyu in the fight is much weaker than Li Han. However, he was still alert and blocked his attacks. Dergyu was very angry at this time and thought that his attacks were all tricks. He also blamed himself for being too careless because he thought about his background. Seeing Dergyu distracted, Li Han immediately felt proud. He thought this was a good opportunity because Dergyu still couldn't think straight. Li Han did not hesitate any longer and stepped forward immediately. He must seize this opportunity. Li Han suddenly remembered when Enrollment and Dergyu fought. He quickly observed his skills. That made Li Han constantly happy, because he was able to capture him. He walked over and stepped on Dergyu's foot. Then he swung his sword to attack him. He hit fast and hard with the will to create a scenario where he himself could win. Seeing Li Han's will, he kept wondering if he was trying so hard, if that was the case. After speaking, he placed his hands on the ground. Then from there, he rolled on the ground with the aim of avoiding Li Han's attack. Li Han was extremely surprised to see Dergyu do so. He immediately exclaimed that he was trying so hard. Dergyu was almost at a disadvantage right now. He was extremely confused, but then he told himself that it was not the time to think wildly. Upon seeing the scene just now, Angela once again praised the great battle. Dergyu stood up step by step and he thought that just now was quite humiliating. Then he rushed towards Li Han and said he would not forgive Li Han. Because it was so sudden and unexpected, Dergyu's sword grazed Li Han's face. Next, Dergyu continuously counterattacked. He used all his strength to fight back. Li Han did not hesitate. He prepared to respond to that attack. Professor Enrollment was outside observing the battle and he said that Li Han and Dergyu were better than he thought. And he also knew that Li Han and Dergyu both had very good skills, but he looked towards Dergyu and was a bit surprised because he did not expect that he could use the moon sword technique to this extent, but the more he tried to attack, the more stamina he consumed. When he looked at Li Han, it was different. He saw that he was still very calm and he was trying to react to every move of his opponent. Li Han observed Dergyu carefully in every movement. At this point, it seems like he's getting too excited, but still. Before he could finish speaking, Li Han grabbed his sword and immediately counterattacked. The force of his attack just made him stunned, wondering about the pressure that the sword brought. At this moment, Li Han Wardanez's eyes were suddenly startled and sweat broke out. Immediately, Dergyu quickly approached Li Han Wardanez's feet. Seeing that, he silently thought that he needed to concentrate and not waver. With incredible speed, Dergyu unleashed consecutive slashes. Because the speed was so fast, the naked eye could only see waves of mana passing through the place where he swung his sword. At the same time, Li Han Wardanez realized that this is your chance to win. He remembered that at that time, Dergyu's face was drenched in sweat and his veins were bulging because his ability to judge based on experience was blinded by the unexpected situation. Afterwards, Li Han Wardanez remembered how Dergyu rolled several times to avoid his sword slash. He thought, thanks to that he had a lot of extra movements. Dergyu's face clearly showed signs of exhaustion, and clearly Li Han Wardanez also noticed this detail. He thought to himself, looking at the amount of mana on his sword, his strength was about to run out. At this time, Li Han Wardanez focused on the amount of mana on the sword. He clearly knew that he was not tired when using mana. Thinking of this, the battle in Li Han Wardanez's head now turned into an hourglass. He was above and Dergyu was below, and now it was only a matter of time. At this moment, Dergyu suddenly attacked but Li Han Wardanez avoided it and counterattacked, making him swear, damn it, damn it. Makes him swear endlessly, damn it. Seeing that his slashes were ineffective against Li Han Wardanez, he couldn't help but break out in a cold sweat, grit his teeth and wonder if he didn't have enough strength. In contrast to him, Li Han Wardanez only shed a few beads of sweat. Seeing this, Dergyu was surprised to think why he didn't lose any strength at all. He just didn't show his emotions. Thinking of this, Dergyu felt like he was fighting an egg with a rock, and Li Han Wardanez was the rock and he was the egg. Then the image of little Dergyu lying in the palm of Li Han Wardanez's hand appeared. He continued thinking, lying neatly in his hand. At this time, Dergyu completely lost his temper and shouted out in fear, heck! But Li Han Wardanez was just cold and didn't say a word. Immediately, a beautiful sword was launched from Li Han Wardanez, causing Dergyu to have no time to defend, so the sword resonated. Durgyu's sword fell from above and stuck straight into the ground. Not missing the opportunity, Lihan Wardanez's sword immediately pressed against Durgyu's neck. His weapon was gone, his strength was exhausted, Durgyu's face was drenched in sweat, he could only stay still. After that, Durgyu continuously gasped in pain. And the same goes for Lihan Wardanez, he was tired after the match so he couldn't stop breathing. At this moment, Professor Angeldal came and announced the end of the match, the winner had been decided. Hearing that, Lihan Wardanez put his sword back, and Durgyu wiped his sweat with his hand. At the same time, Angeldal's voice continued to sound, both of them moved forward. Having finished speaking, Angeldal looked at Durgyu who was constantly panting and felt regretful. After that, the image of Durgyu and Lihan Wardanez being placed on the scale appeared and Angeldal judged that if he had been calmer, the result might have been different, but he panicked when he encountered murderous intent. Next is the image of Durgyu sitting miserably under the scale. At the same time Angeldal's thoughts continue to appear. At a young age, it is difficult. At this moment, Angeldal's eyes glanced towards Lihan Wardanez and thought, Lihan is okay. Under the shining sunset, before everyone's eyes, Lihan Wardanez proudly hung his cape on his shoulder. Angeldal saw this and whispered in recognition that everyone had to look at Lihan Wardanez with different eyes. Then, in front of the two of them Angeldal spoke calmly, he praised both of them for doing very well and began to say his real thoughts. First of all, winning or losing is not everything. Angeldal smiled and continued to win without being arrogant or discouraged, only then can progress be made. Then he put his hands on the backs of the two people and told them to shake hands. Hearing that, Lihan Wardanez couldn't help but think that with his personality, he wouldn't leave it alone. He even thought about what Durgyu would do before he touched him. But contrary to Lihan Wardanez's thoughts, Durgyu extended his hand. Durgyu calmed down, he praised the fighting very well and also apologized for being rude. Hearing this sentence, Lihan Wardanez couldn't help but stiffen. In his ears was still Durgyu's voice. He said that Lihan Wardanez deserved this. Looking at Durgyu's calm face, Lihan Wardanez finally relaxed and thought to himself that he didn't look like he did when he attacked. After thinking about it, Lihan Wardanez and Durgyu shook hands, and at the same time Lihan Wardanez also responded to that apology. He probably said it because he was worried. Seeing the two of them end the match peacefully, Angeldal was so happy that he burst into tears and kept clapping, but the two students behind him felt helpless. Suddenly, Angeldal turned his head around, looked at them with sharp eyes, making them jump in fear, then seriously reminded them to clap their hands. When it got dark, the students gathered around Durgyu. Before the eyes of the students, Jijel's voice rang out in the name of the White Tiger Tower student, I'm sure. The remaining students also stared at Durgyu. The wind blew Jijel's cloak away. After that, he wanted Durgyu to take revenge on Lihan Wardanez. Hearing that, Durgyu frankly said that he lost because he was inexperienced. Seeing that Durgyu did not want to do so, the students opposite immediately started speaking up, some blaming Lihan Wardanez for playing dirty, others saying it was not Durgyu's fault. Faced with these words, Durgyu still persisted, I decided that it was because I was weak. At this time, Jijel sighed helplessly, indifferently saying that it was not important now. Having said that, two mascots, the dragon and the tiger, appeared behind Jijel. He seemed to say that the important thing was that the tower's honor and pride had been trampled on by Durgyu. After speaking, his face darkened and coldly held the Choi family responsible. After listening, Durgyu knew that the Mercenary family was the center of the Knight's families, so he was somewhat afraid and respectful. He immediately worriedly asked them what responsibility they wanted him to take. Seeing that the fish had taken the bait, Jijel snapped his fingers and said very simply. After snapping his fingers, two male students immediately took Durgyu's shoulders, and at the same time Jijel taunted that he was of poor quality so he needed to make up for it with quantity. Seeing this, Durgyu immediately understood and directly mocked them shamelessly for being a knight. But Jijel coldly denied it, saying that it was the excuse of losers. But the students standing around Jijel started whispering, wondering, I've never heard of this, why do we have to go this far? Jijel of course refused to leave it alone. He put on a smiling face and asked if there were a few people who disagreed, why don't they ask directly? After finishing speaking, the surroundings immediately fell silent, no one dared to continue speaking. In the end, it was Durgyu who broke the silence. He coldly left and protested, not wanting revenge. Hearing that, Jijel immediately mocked Durgyu as a coward and ran away, wanting to find someone to replace him. As soon as he finished speaking, a male student immediately spoke up, wanting to ask for a chance. As he finished speaking, there were laughter and mocking looks everywhere. In his heart, Durgu of course understood better than anyone else, that even if he believed in Wardanas' skills, 1 against 3 was too much, and moreover, they were all students of carefully trained knights. Thinking of this, Durgu clenched his fists, silently determined that he could not stay still. This was not the way of a knight. Even if the decision affected the future, he would still siding with Wardanas. A while later, a footprint appeared on the forest trail. Durgu ran quickly back to the previous position. When he arrived, Durgu shouted loudly, "Wardanas, you!" As he finished speaking, a ray of light flew straight towards him, just missing a little bit and it would have hit his head, but it hit the tree next to him. The light source just turned off, a stone fell to the ground. In front of Durgu was a male student lying down. In front of him were 2 other male students. Even though their faces were very scared, one of them still had a stubborn mouth and still shouted, "How dare you, bastard!" Li Han coldly called out. He used his stick to control the stones to fly in the air. His voice was extremely scary. He threatened them that if they wanted to die, they would come closer. After looking at the scene just now, Durgu opened his mouth in bewilderment, unable to help but wonder what the hell this was all about. A moment ago, the stick was placed on the ground, and someone called Wardanas' name. As students in the academy, each of them carried a stick in their hand. They came here with the intention of threatening, not wanting to let Li Han win the match, threatening that he would not participate again, which class is okay. Looking at this group of people, Li Han couldn't help but feel really annoying when they did that. He decided to chase them away first and think about it later. After thinking about it, his expression immediately changed, darkening his face and disdainfully asking them if they knew which family he came from. When the students saw this, they couldn't sit still but still shouted loudly, thinking that we were afraid. Having finished speaking, the 2 of them looked at each other in fear and looked at each other to encourage each other that it would be okay. At the same time, Li Han also guessed that perhaps they had someone to back them up. Seeing the proud faces of the 3 of them, Li Han unconsciously guessed who the mastermind was behind. It seemed like there was only one mastermind behind. Who do you think is left to clean up this mess? Thinking of this, Li Han couldn't help but breathe a sigh of relief, thinking helplessly that after all, they wouldn't have behaved like that. Li Han directly asked who ordered them to do it. Was he from a big family so he couldn't refuse? As soon as he said this, they were all surprised. At this time, a male student, although scared, still ordered him to shut up and reminded everyone not to be fooled. Immediately the 3 of them picked up their sticks and shouted loudly to surround him. Li Han's whole body was tense because he knew that 3 against 1 was a bit tense. Then he remembered that Al Rarlong had once reminded him that running away was the best way to deal with many situations. But Li Han is currently surrounded by 3 students. He is helpless, wondering how he can escape if his escape route is blocked. Suddenly his eyes glanced down, startled by realization. At Li Han's feet there were quite a few glowing stones. He silently judged that it would be possible to have these. Li Han remembered when he controlled the brush to fly and thought about the current conditions. The size of those 2 things was not much different. Without thinking much, Li Han immediately took action, raising a stick and giving the order to move. As expected, when the stones flew up and flew straight towards the students, one of them couldn't believe that he could use this type of magic. Was the Wardanas family really different from them? Seeing that this was a complete success, Li Han secretly sighed because it was a success, sure that they would be scared and run away, and he would take the opportunity to run away. The stone that Li Han controlled stopped in the air. He simultaneously shouted the words "Go away." Having said that, Li Han gently tapped the stick in his hand. A stone immediately flew straight into the head of one of them, creating a beautiful flight path. Before the surprised look of his accomplices, that guy fell face down on the ground, with a dark red bump on his head. Just like the rest of them, Li Han was also surprised. Immediately the other 2 guys in unison cursed him as a bastard. Why did he do that? And Li Han panicked because he didn't intend to do that. He probably needs to practice more. Even though they still dared to curse on the outside, they were actually scared. They were calculating whether they should continue to accompany him or not when they saw the rock attacking so strongly. They could see that Li Han was no different from a god of death burning with murderous intent. The rush must follow the rush. Li Han sighed because this did not go according to his plan but still had to continue. After thinking about it, Li Han showed a murderous look on his face, and his voice was like a demon king demanding his life, warning him that if he wanted to die, he should just rush forward. In his mind, he was thinking that he had to do it. Seeing this, the 2 students were naturally scared and helped each other run away, but their mouths were still very strong and threatened him. On this side, Durgu is no different from a bewildered golden deer wondering what he just watched. Li-han breathed softly and asked Durgu why he also came to beat him, making Durgu startled and stammered in refusal. A moment later, Li-han was surprised to learn that the bastard gazelle had made this threat. Sitting next to the burning fire, Durgu awkwardly said it wasn't Jijel. Hearing that, Li-han replied yes, so he said that. The image of everyone in Bakho Tower appeared in Durgu's mind. He began to recount the atmosphere in the tower, which was quite special. Everyone was happy and close to each other. But when he thought about the White Tiger Tower having its own order, Durgu couldn't help but feel scared. After that, Durgu sketched Jijel's face on the ground and said he looked like this. Li-han bewilderedly asked who this was. But as soon as he finished speaking, Li-han remembered the meeting and asked suspiciously if it was the guy from the other day. Li-han touched his chin and began to compose himself that he thought Jijel was a good person, acting differently from his appearance. Durgu sitting next to him could only stiffen his face, patiently explaining that being mean had nothing to do with it, nothing to do with appearance. But Li-han didn't pay any attention and continued to pretend to be silent. He thought that Jijel was performing his role. Li-han said to himself and realized that that was the reason Jijel was famous. In front of the adoration, Li-han Durgu's voice worriedly asked if he was listening. While Durgu was surprised that Jijel was a celebrity, but he thought that he was a normal person, but Li-han did not pay attention to those words. He looked at his fists clenched and speculated that Jijel approaching him was there as a reason. At this time, Li-han felt that it was very strange that they came to beat him. Hearing that, Durgu picked up the drywood branch and explained that there were several reasons for that. Durgu explained that the first reason is that Li-han comes from the Wardina's family. He then said that if Jijel defeated Li-han, someone from a famous family, Jijel would have more say than the students from the year above. Hearing that, Li-han couldn't help but feel uncomfortable because in Durgu's opinion, he was a sacrifice of power for Jijel. Durgu agreed and felt worried about it. Having said that, the image of Li-han holding the sword emitted a bright aura. He felt that Li-han would continue to have a positive attitude in the future. Next, behind Li-han appeared people in the dark. According to Durgu, they were students in the tower who hated him. And in the end, Jijel is the one manipulating them with a sinister face. As Durgu said, he knows how to take advantage of that hateful attitude. The fire was still burning brightly. At this time Durgu sincerely advised Li-han that if he wanted to continue learning swordsmanship, he needed to be careful. After the conversation, Li-han returned to his house deep in the forest. Li-han remembered Durgu advising him to try to avoid the students of the White Tiger Tower because then Jijel wouldn't be able to do anything. He opened the door and exclaimed that this was good advice. Li-han's footsteps stopped in front of the door. Even though it was good advice, he couldn't follow it. Then suddenly veins appeared on his face. The first reason he couldn't follow was that it was difficult to find a good class according to his own standards. The second reason was that he felt angry at them for daring to do so, dragging you into politics. This is a matter of honor. In the common room, everyone in the room was doing their own work, only when Li-han's voice rang out, attracting their attention. His appearance at this time looked extremely miserable. He told everyone that he had just been attacked by students from White Tiger Tower. Then he whined and cried on the spot, frustratedly saying the reason he was beaten was just because he was a member of the Tan Long Tower. Inside he was curious about how everyone would react. Hearing that, all the students were surprised. Immediately a student slammed his hand on the table to vent his anger, shouting loudly that those white dragons were crazy, they didn't know who they were kidding. Then the blue-haired boy completely lost his temper, wanted to call everyone upstairs down, and despised when they didn't dare to tease Gainando but instead teased Li-han. Hearing his name, Gai Nandu on the upper floor looked down and wondered why it was him. Seeing that, Li-han whispered in wonder because he seemed more excited than he thought. At this time, the male student became angry and wanted to call everyone to find weapons. Li-han saw that the situation was not good and immediately calmed everyone down. But they all refused in unison because they still owed him. But according to what everyone said, they were in debt here only because everyone had eaten the meat Li-han had hunted. If it weren't for him, they probably would have starved to death. Hearing that, Li-han did not dare to tell the truth that he was just lying. His guilt grew more and more. At this time, the blue-haired male student shouted loudly for everyone to gather. Then, the blue-haired male student asked everyone to pay attention and gather in 2 horizontal lines. After finishing, everyone excitedly shouted in unison, "Let's go destroy the White Tiger Towers." In Li-han's head, he imagined the battle between the dragon and the tiger, only to discover that he had messed everything up and had no idea that the Tan Dragon Tower hated the White Tiger so much. Continuing the image of the dragon and tiger as students representing the two towers, it turns out that we always hate those who are the most similar to us. At this time, the blue-haired male student and two other students were busy announcing that everyone should use everything to make weapons to go to the White Tiger Tower. At this moment, someone suddenly shouted loudly, telling everyone to wait. As soon as Ashan Dalkard finished speaking, everyone turned to look at her in surprise. Waiting for everyone to calm down, Ashan continued to speak. She wanted everyone to listen to her before leaving. The students began to scramble up holding sticks and sticks. The leader asked to find weapons to go to the White Tiger Tower. Suddenly Ashan came forward and shouted loudly for everyone to stop. Hearing Ashan's voice, the students suddenly stopped and looked at Ashan. Ashan frowned. She wanted everyone to listen to what she was about to say now. Ashan advised everyone not to act hastily when she mentioned that the tower was only for people from knight families. If they acted rashly, it would mean they would lose. Li Han raised his hands to signal his agreement. He highly appreciated Ashan's reason. Ashan clearly expressed his determination to stay and wait and then attack. The students were convinced by her. They agreed with this idea and praised the Dalkard family. Li Han held his head helplessly when he saw them act like that. He even blamed himself for being stupid for expecting something from them. Afraid that they would take a risk, Li Han stood up and made it clear that he did not want them to take revenge. Li Han wanted to solve it himself without their help. It was his honor and dignity. The blonde guy was dissatisfied. He talked about Wodaniz's dark history very cunningly and despicably, so those people were not easy to handle. Li Han listened to him and stood still. His cursing style did not bother, a bit scary. After scolding Wodaniz, the blonde man gasped. Li Han couldn't sit still. He made it clear that they were children from a respectable family. Acting like them was shameful. Hearing this, the students scratched their heads and looked at each other shyly, seeing that they seemed to agree that Li Han wanted to get to the main point. Li Han's voice made the three students look at him in bewilderment. Li Han mentioned their ability to attack in groups, so he wanted to respond together. The students were all excited to respond to this collaboration. They were ready. Standing among the conflicting children of the family, he resolved it amicably. Then they all dispersed in their own direction. The students talked about the matter of the next class studying with the bastards, making it difficult for them to want petty revenge. He mentioned wanting to show them the masters of lighting magic and she happily agreed. Watching them leave, Li Han stood still. Li Han's arms and legs were shaking as if he were being crushed. Li Han was worried about the fact that he was one of the only ones. The students talked among themselves about the upcoming plan to disguise themselves and strip off their bodies, leaving Li Han behind. Li Han has not yet mastered the lighting magic. He collapsed in pain and tried to hold on, but it was unsuccessful. The next day, Enrollment appeared yawning. Li Han's face was pale, his body tired, standing in a corner to greet Enrollment, making her scream loudly. She saw his eyes like a panda and couldn't help but be curious. When she asked him, Li Han said he was practicing magic. Yoner was told that he couldn't use magic, but she asked if he had permission yet. He tiredly put down his staff and said he had permission. Yoner Makin's head ached when she heard Li Han talk about how they had mastered lighting magic, but this was the first time she heard this. Suddenly Guy suddenly appeared, making Li Han and Yoner Makin wonder why he was here at this time. Guy Nandu looked away with suspicion when he heard Li Han greeting him. He secretly put his hand in his pocket, looking very suspicious. Guy Nandu brought out a delicious grilled sausage. His face was drooling with pleasure. Then, he sat by the fireplace, looking excitedly at the sausages, making Li Han look helpless, and Yoner sighed that he was regal. The smell of sausages makes Guy Nandu unable to help but drool. He is truly an eating soul. Li Han patted his shoulder, startling him and causing him to drop the sausage. Li Han hesitantly told him to eat freely without hiding it. Guy Nandu seemed to have been caught in the act. He hesitantly asked Li Han, "When were you here?" He learned that Li Han had been following him since he took the sausage. He was afraid of losing face. Guy Nandu tried to deny it. Suddenly Li Han cried out that the sausage was about to burn, causing Guy Nandu to panic and take the sausage. Li Han looked at Guy Nandu, who was crying because the sausage was burned. Li Han was speechless. The scene of everyone in a daze, complaining and holding their heads appeared before him. Li Han took a look at how bad everyone looked. Hunger caused the students to lose control and pick up their shoes to bite. Yoner mentioned that they did not fall into a worse situation because Li Han sold them food. Yoner feels that if it weren't for that, things would have been worse. The situation started to get tense. Li Han suggested taking action, but Yoner said they didn't have many rations left. Lee Han sighed. He scolded Professor Euregilm because he did not let him take the ingredients from the trunk even though he tried to get them. Recalling that time, Lee Han and Yoner were holding a loaf of rice paper when he was caught in battle. He said it was all for him to eat, and the matter of the two of them putting jam in their pockets was also discovered by him. Professor Euregilm said that you can only eat enough to fill your stomach, so why should you take extra portions? The two of them fell into deep thought. Lee Han sighed that there was no way to steal them, but Yoner was thinking about whether there was any other way. The students quickly went into the classroom. They said hello to the professor who was sitting in the room first. This is the ogre Professor Garcia Kim. She cares about her students so much that she can immediately feel the strange change between them. First, a week after joining the academy, the students became very hungry. They became out of control. Second, she sensed the tension between the towers. Because of their different backgrounds, the rivalry is fierce, but the tension between the Dragon Tower and the White Tiger is very intense. Garcia Kim asked the student to sit down when he saw that the student was conflicted. Garcia Kim knows that the more they compete with each other, the stronger they will become, which is also the principal's opinion. She just sighed. She couldn't agree with that. Garcia Kim gave a strange smile. She wanted everyone to be nice to each other, and she asked the students to sit down. The students became afraid when she checked the old lesson about lighting magic. Everyone was chanting Buddha's name, but it wasn't them. Lee Han covered his yawn with his hand and volunteered to return the cards. He looked at the students next to him with a feeling of victory and defeat. He had to practice this time and not fall behind, even though he had just done it this morning. This time Lee Han successfully took over the main character role of the class. Looking around the classroom, Lee Han started to panic. He couldn't believe his eyes. The truth was inherently sinister, and now he understood about Wodanas. Lee Han looked at Gai Nandu disgruntled about his lighting magic problem, but Gai Nandu looked at him with a wry smile. Gai Nandu calmly said that he only knew how to do it in theory, but practice was not successful. Gai Nan was also confident that he would be able to do it soon because they were all nobles, leaving Lee Han with no choice but to put his head on the table. Lee Han collapsed in pain when he realized he had been deceived, and he even scolded these arrogant noble bastards. He cried in pain, knowing that he had worked hard in vain. Garcia saw Lee Han volunteering and praised him endlessly. The first volunteer was Lee Han from the Dragon Tower. The other person is a white-haired girl student who also comes from the Dragon Tower. Lee Han turned around in surprise. He did not expect that it was a princess and had the opportunity to approach her. But the princess responded to him with cold eyes. Seeing that look, Lee Han was embarrassed and afraid to show his face. He wondered if he had done something wrong. Suddenly Lee Han was tapped on the head by a pair of hands. Ashan whispered to Lee Han. She mentioned that the princess believed strange rumors about him. Lee Han was curious about that rumor. Ashan said it was full of malice and insult. Ash angrily recounted that Lee Han only cared about grades instead of knowledge. She expressed her displeasure and couldn't believe it. Lee Han doubts life because according to him that is correct. Lee Han thought it wasn't wrong and he had nothing to say about it. But looking at Ashan, she was furious, making him a bit concerned. Ashan boldly expressed her disappointment in the princess. She did not expect the princess to believe such an absurd rumor, but the princess remained silent. Lee Han seemed to add fuel to the fire. He said it was the princess's right to believe it or not. Hearing him say that, Ashan doubted life and turned away to look at him, not afraid of an enemy who was as good at pointing out teammates as he was. Ashan was so angry that she clenched her fists. She growled and called his name. She thought of Lee Han holding the white sheep and blessing him with peace, and she wondered how holy he was. Ashan thought that there were many descendants from great families, but no one was as perfect as him. The words duty and nobility were his motto. Ashan was moved. She whined about the reason her parents sent her here, whether it was to meet him. She did not forget to keep the two cursive words, "I'm sorry for speaking ill of you, father." She wiped away her tears and was proud of this wonderful friend, but Lee Han thought she had some brain problem. Now it's time for Lee Han to return the assignment. A golden light illuminates the entire classroom. As for the princess, she is a shining blue gourd. The two of them coordinated with each other, and the light split into two beautiful green-gold streams that made everyone look up. Garcia Kim looked at the results of the two students. She applauded. Garcia mentioned the fact that it is rare for students to successfully perform the spell in the first week. Garika Kim was happy to meet such talented students, making other academies a bit sad. Realizing that the students were a bit discouraged, Garika Kim spoke up to encourage them. Garika Kim said that magic light magic is the most basic magic. It is also the first step for students to feel magic. Garika Kim was very insightful into the students' psychology. She comforted the students not to be discouraged, while Lee Han stood next to her and was excited. Lee Han guessed that no one was listening to the professor. Looking at the students teasing each other, Lee Han somehow knew there was no way they were listening while behaving like that. Garika Kim intentionally reminded the students to be careful about their seats. Her long experience as an ogre professor was not just a title. The students stood looking towards the professor. The students spoke with disdain for luminescent magic. The students above were competing to discuss their origins from the White Tiger Tower. To prove that he was right, the student mumbled the evidence. Garika Kim looked at the students helplessly. Garika Kim mentioned starting to learn elemental magic this semester, making the students excited and even repeating it to make sure. Murad was also extremely excited. She didn't expect to learn elemental magic. The other students also started to stir. Garika Kim reminds students in advance about luminescence and they will automatically know how to do it during the learning process. Elemental magic includes simple elements such as water, fire, earth, wind and darkness. It also includes more difficult attributes, such as gravity magic, elemental magic that has long been the foundation of other magic, such as magic to summon spirits, or bestow their unique properties on ancient artifacts. For example, it's like learning 4 simple calculations to apply them to high school math. More specifically, even if you only learn basic elemental magic, no matter where you go, you will be treated as a very important person, known by everyone as the magician. Lee Han was looking forward to this lesson. Garika Kim asked students to check their compatibility with each basic element. Each student will have an element that is suitable for them. Hearing the professor say that, the students began to talk about how there was no point in learning all the elements, or that they only wanted to learn the fire element even though someone advised them to adapt to it first. Garcia Kim stomped her foot so hard that her foot hit the floor. Garcia started the class. A burning candle appeared before Lee Han. Durgyu also received a stick like Lee Han, which made him confused. Even Ishan is as good as those two. Garcia Kim mentioned that the previous lesson can also be applied here, and that what students need to create is fire, and fire is flammable, so students are asked to be careful. Looking at the burning candle in front of him, Gai Nam-do thought of the prospect of being with the fire. The result was being grilled, making Gai Nam-do scared and sweaty. Garika Kim took the stick in her hand and asked the student to recite this mantra in her mind. The elemental magic dance began, fiery chants rang out, and the fire burned fiercely. Many flames combined and rolled together into a fiery column of fire. Garcia Kim stands majestically next to the fire pillar, looking like a man who is fearless and fearless of fire. Looking at the pillar of fire standing tall in the classroom, the students couldn't help but look at it with surprised eyes and mouths. Lee Han also looked up. He tried to show that he was mature and did not want to react too childishly. Garcia Kim reached out to touch the burning pillar of fire, heat spreading throughout her hand. Seeing how she controlled and used magic made Lee Han praise her for her coolness. Having prepared everything, Garcia turned around and asked the students to try it, and the students also responded positively. The students performed their magic together, and fiery chants began to ring out. Lee Han alone looked thoughtfully at the candle before his eyes. He placed his hands next to him. Lee Han thought about the professor's reason for giving them to him and the other students. Lee Han looked closer at the candle. The closer he was planning to do it, the easier it would be to visualize. Lee Han followed his plan and started trying magic. Garika Kim was aiming at him. Garika Kim asked Lee Han to stop, causing the tree to disappear in front of him, causing Lee Han to panic. Garika Kim standing next to him decided that Lee Han was banned from using fire magic for a while in his bewilderment. Not accepting the truth, Lee Han stood up and asked the reason, because that was the way for him to do cool magic. Garika Kim mentioned how dangerous it was, making him a bit confused. Lee Han remembered the time he deployed the magic. The light emitted was a bit too bright, causing his eyes to hurt, so he avoided the light with his eyes closed. Lee Han sat and thought about the fact that if he couldn't control the light, he would only be temporarily blinded, but suppose the fire broke out. He was so tired, he was angry and didn't want to think about it anymore. Garika mentioned that he would try fire magic again when his senses were better, and for now he should practice water magic. Lee Han looked bewildered at the bowl of water. Garika Kim said almost nothing about the danger of this magic. Lee Han knows that water, like fire, is also a basic element, but its coolness is negative to infinity. Afraid that he might accidentally say something, he tried to swallow the words, so it was better to keep his mouth shut. Fire and lightning are better at attacking. Earth and metal are better at defense. But the uses of water are quite obscure, he still can't figure out the specific problem. Suddenly Li Han thought about the use of drinking water wherever he wanted, even while studying. Li Han could only sigh, he knew he couldn't do anything about safety being the top priority. Ashan also felt jealous of him when she saw the professor giving special instructions, which made her a bit uncomfortable. After hearing this, Li Han was scared, his face turned pale, he begged her to shut up, he was really a man who wished for someone else. Looking at his shadow appearing in the bowl of water, he began to get nervous. Li Han pointed his wand at the bowl of water and recited the awakening spell. Li Han kept reciting the spell, he was about to lose his patience. He always wanted to learn fire magic, and this was the motivation that made the spell rise succeed this time. A large whirlpool appeared, many layers of water intertwined with each other. Ashan's eyes were opened so much that she had to adjust her glasses to look at this masterpiece. Water magic with strange shapes. Li Han's appearance appears inside the water drop. He and Ashan looked at the stream of water condensing in the air. Ashan was not surprised at his talent, she did not expect that he would succeed in just 3 tries, quite shocking news for this academy. Seeing the results Li Han achieved, Garika Kim praised him and told him about the water element that was suitable for him. She also solemnly informed the students that Li Han had successfully practiced elemental magic. The students congratulated him on making a big water ball, but there were still students who were jealous and didn't bother to look. Garika Kim reminded the remaining students not to lose patience, each person will have different compatibility with the elements. She meant to remind that students who grow up in a family that works in a blacksmith are compatible with fire. Students who grow up with a fishing family are compatible with water. Those who grew up in the vast steppes are compatible with fawn. Garika Kim also implies that the more exposed to an element, the easier it will be for students to reveal that element. Li Han looked at the water ball in front of him, he was not compatible with water at all. Li Han recalls the image of him being drowned by his professor in the school swimming pool. The princess looked uncomfortable and looked at him with judgmental eyes. Li Han looked at the princess in fear and sweat, he didn't know why the princess was glaring at him. He stood up and turned to look at the princess, but she turned away and ignored him. The water ball was allowed to float freely in the air, Li Han still thought it was a princess looking at him. Just in time, Li Han had a water ball pour down on him, making him wet. Looking at Li Han's appearance, Garika laughed and advised him to be neutral, otherwise he would not be able to maintain his elemental form. She hoped next time he would try to keep his elemental form as long as possible. Then a breeze blew and dried his clothes, making Li Han extremely excited. Li Han is extremely grateful for the professor, she is like the school's aura. Li Han was touched by her care, he understood what she meant, Li Han wanted to know the time between elements. Garika Kim mentioned holding on until the mana ran out, but she thought that for Li Han it was impossible. She wants you to keep it until class ends. This answer hit him like lightning, Li Han considered it torture, not learning. Seeing that Garika was about to leave, he quickly asked her to help him, but she had no intention of doing so. Li Han stood frozen as he watched the professor leave. He clenched his fists angrily, almost forgetting something important. According to the information he knew, Garika Kim was also a professor at this crazy academy, and her mind was basically screwed up. Li Han helplessly leaned his hands on the table, his head steaming. Garika Kim stood in the distance, looking back at him. Maintaining such magic for a long period of time was very taxing on his mental ability, like having to balance and spin on his fingers. However, Garika Kim wants Li Han to be properly trained. The fact that he was able to create such a large water ball in just 3 tries was a talent. In particular, Li Han is the person with the most abundant mana in history. That proves he has the ability to become a genius. Because of those things, she must hone the rough gem that is Li Han. Garika Kim placed hope on him to do well, on the contrary, Li Han was holding the element with a dissatisfied face, he scolded the professor at this academy, there was a misunderstanding between them. The students' goodbyes rang out. Under the high temperature, Li Han was trying hard to believe what he said. Li Han nervously told Professor Uregilm about his excessive behavior. But for Professor Uregilm, it was like a guitar that was heard in one ear and passed through another. Li Han whines to him about the princess being able to control the fire element. Yan era is compatible with the wind element. The special thing is always at the end of the chain. Guy Nandu almost burned the whole class, making Li Han a bit disappointed. Li Han hugged his chest in frustration when he could only use the water element during the entire lesson. Professor Euregilm stroked his beard. He mentioned that Professor Kim liked him, so he trained him that way. When Li Han heard it, he burst out laughing. Professor Euregilm did not expect that that was the reason why he used his precious day off to garden. Li Han looked at Professor Euregilm and burst out laughing. Only silence. Successful people always have their own path. Professor Euregilm said he was a whiner. He was used to this. He also repeated that he was the one who volunteered and said he would do it, making Li Han bewildered. Some time ago, Li Han volunteered to help Professor Euregilm, making him touched. Professor Euregilm even laughed when he heard him say that eating food was considered payment. That time he pampered him so much that he could do whatever he wanted. Li Han was pushed forward to bring some more food, causing him to scold him for being clever. Watching him drop food on the ground reminded him not to neglect this kid. Professor Euregilm put some tea leaves into the wooden tube. His hand poured water, but his eyes and mind turned to Li Han. He found him a bit strange compared to before. Looking at him pulling out each carrot, Professor Euregilm knew a little about him coming from the Wonadas lineage. Professor Euregilm took a sip of tea. He mentioned whether he had any conflict with the White Tiger Tower. Hearing that, Li Han frankly said that the White Tiger Tower thing was quite annoying. Professor Euregilm was not surprised at all. He thought nothing had changed, and when Li Han heard it, he felt somewhat relieved. It really did scare this little heart. While Li Han was pulling out the carrot, he mentioned the issue of non-confrontational tower relationships in the academy being okay, and he also complained about being tired of studying law in the academy. Professor Euregilm burst out laughing when he heard that. He did not expect him to have this thought. He advised him to focus on practicing, which was more beneficial, according to the experience of his predecessors. The atmosphere suddenly became silent. Li Han mentioned that he accidentally fought with them. Now it's time for Li Han to deal with this old man. Li Han turned to look at him in fear. He hoped Professor Euregilm didn't look at him like that, because he didn't mean it. On the contrary, Professor Euregilm calmly sipped his tea. Professor Euregilm wondered why the conflict happened in the first week. Li Han recounted that because he chose the swordsmanship class, he was attacked by them. Professor Euregilm heard it and spit out the tea in his mouth. Seeing Professor Euregilm coughing, Li Han stood up and asked him with concern. Professor Euregilm turned on the drying mode to crisp up Li Han. His choice of swordsmanship was tantamount to violating their territory. According to Pro Tip, tigers are animals with a high habit of protecting their territory. Li Han dusted himself off, still adamant that he had the right to register for any subject he wanted. Seeing that he was so stubborn and talking so much, it was also a pity for this old body. Professor Euregilm had to ignore this problem. After all, it was already resolved. Professor Euregilm mentioned their skills. He didn't know about magic, but about swordsmanship. You should be careful. Li Han was happy because he still cared about him. He even accidentally said that he could fight his father alone, so he struggled a lot. The fatal words that made Professor Euregilm's face darken were truly revengeful. He couldn't swallow a sip of tea. Seeing him stand up, Li Han looked away wonderingly. Professor Euregilm is in a good mood today, so he will make him something to eat, which makes Li Han extremely grateful. Professor Euregilm took the food. He thought he should treat Li Han well. He was afraid that one day, Li Han would come back and hold his sword around his neck because of some matter. At that time, he would become the greatest swordsman in the empire. After that, Li Han sat obediently on the table and waited for him to bring out the food. Li Han excitedly enjoyed the delicious food. While cleaning up, Li Han suddenly remembered that he had work. Li Han looked at the house and objects in front, wondering if he was the only manager of that place. Professor Euregilm wiped the bowl and mouth and explained to him that because they were useless, they should all be thrown away, which was something an alchemist must know. Li Han was startled when he did basic tasks, including dusting the entire cabin, cleaning the furnace to check ingredients, taking care of the fields, and checking fish traps. Seeing that he seemed hesitant, Professor Euregilm was a little suspicious. Li Han smiled foolishly and agreed. Li Han cannot endure this life as a laborer, even though he knows these things are done by students. Li Han came up with the idea of planting some things in the empty space in the field. He asked Professor Euregilm for advice. Professor Euregilm welcomes you to do so. Li thought about steaming cabbage and leeks. He also agreed with him. Afraid that Li Han was cheating, Professor Euregilm carefully reminded him about selling them, startling Li Han. Li Han looked away in surprise. He didn't know why Professor Euregilm knew so well. He thought the upperclassmen did the same. Professor Euregilm helplessly held his head. Professor Euregilm said you were the first. Too tired of this reporter, he had to let him do whatever he wanted. Li Han also obeyed and did his part, leaving him alone to mutter and scold him for being a weird boy. Looking at Napa cabbage and onions stacked on top of each other, Li Han was wondering if there was anything to make from it. Li Han mentioned preparing Napa cabbage and leeks to him. When Li Han heard him say he could make jjigae, he was very surprised. Jjigae is a stew-like soup, usually cooked with meat, seafood and vegetables. In his mind, Li Han began to imagine jjigae. Due to its vast territory, there are countless different culinary cultures depending on the region. If the Wodanas family is in the west, their specialties are bread and cheese. The east is famous for rice, chili sauce noodles and soybeans, which are typical Korean dishes. Li Han sat next to him, wondering if he liked jjigae. Although Professor Euregilm liked it, he didn't eat it often. Professor Euregilm suddenly fell into deep thought. The reason Professor Euregilm rarely eats it is because it is an oriental dish. There are people in the east that he hates, so it follows that he doesn't like jjigae. Li Han began to find out the underlying reason why he looked at things with hatred towards people. Professor Euregilm has his own troubles. He mentions distant relatives living in the east, who complain a lot every time they meet. Professor Euregilm changed the subject. He mentioned that he did not sell the regenerative medicine when it went on sale, which left him penniless, and also left the old man alone. Li Han shyly remained silent. Li Han stood up, holding a pile of bowls and chopsticks. Li Han agreed with him, but he did not expect Eastern people to be quite strict. Professor Euregilm looked up at him. He wanted to know what he was doing on the weekend. Li Han wondered if he was a job for him and was reprimanded by Professor Euregilm for daring to see him as the type of person who made him work all weekend. But unbeknownst to him, Li Han, a student, was emotionally numb due to weekend work. Professor Euregilm knew he didn't have time to come here, so how could he spend the weekend? He asked Li Han to remember the image of the starving student. Each image of biting his shoes, his skinny body losing vitality was what he thought of. Li Han made a breakthrough with his sudden statement, causing him to say it was a bit outrageous. His hand hugged his long, silky beard. Professor Euregilm stood up holding his stick in hand. He mentioned that when we are cornered, we will find something to eat and survive. Like Swan, you will look for fruits and berries. Li Han was curious about dragon fruit. Professor Euregilm commented that it was slow. Professor Euregilm added that dragon fruit will always exist with strong and talented individuals who will solve it themselves. He turned his face to look at Li Han. Li Han is a genius child. He thinks this year will be different. Li Han asked him about the current problem about the Vermilion Tower, which made him a bit surprised. Professor Euregilm said they must be completely separated. These are not children who can be swayed by lust. The Vermilion Tower is a tower built by trainee priests, where they practice asceticism. Even in harsh conditions they still pray. Hearing that, Li Han was a little surprised at how admirable his faith was. If it were him, he probably wouldn't. Li Han decided to go hunting with his friends this weekend. He also confidently affirmed that if they caused trouble with him, it would mean he would let them know what a festival is. The professor held the broom and rushed back and forth across the ground. He continued to listen to Li Han say that he couldn't avoid it, but at least he wasn't the aggressor. Hearing that was enough, the professor turned around, closed his eyes and calmly said that there was a possibility that they would choose another way. Li Han immediately wondered about any other way the professor mentioned. Hearing that, he did not speak hastily but hesitated in thought. Thinking for so long, the professor only gave him a short, concise answer and ran away. With the Magic Academy campus, there is a steel wall surrounded by magic spells. But still, every year there are students who run away. Hearing the professor talk about students being able to escape through the academy with a wall surrounded by magic spells, he thought that if he thought about what could be gained from escaping, it would be obvious that we will defend. With new clothes, new shoes, bread and jam, even butter and cheese, or all the other dozen or so daily necessities. The look of satisfaction on his face showed that there were plenty of reasons to run away. Seeing the proud look on his face, as if he had a plan in mind, the professor immediately shouted angrily, pointed at him, told him to remove that expression, and asked him if he had done any more stupid things, right? The professor had a serious face and didn't joke with him at all. He warned him to forget about it. The reason why the tigers were the first to try every year was because they were very simple-minded. Hearing the professor say that, he immediately turned around and asked if anyone had succeeded. It seemed his question had hit the professor's heart. He was startled. He closed his eyes again, his face darkened, thinking yes, but everything was so messed up that he wouldn't listen to me, as if he didn't want to explain this escape matter to him. The professor immediately turned his head back, raised his hand to the sky, acting like he could do whatever he wanted. He had nothing to do with what he did. He told him whatever it was, if you wanted to try then try it. The best time to overcome adversity is when you are young. Seeing the teacher say that, Li-han's face lit up like a star in the sky, his hand on his chest as if he was confident that he was okay. He would never do that. Acting like that saw him building his trust in the professor. Seeing Li-han so proud, the professor shouted at him not to say that with that expression. In a corner of the room, 3 people dressed in black from head to toe were gathered and talking to a boy with blue skin. One of them said, "Hey, focus here." A boy in a black shirt was holding a burning candle. Under the candlelight, his eyes were blue. He pointed in the opposite direction and said that if you still want to return intact, you'd better listen to our orders. The person the guy in the black shirt was talking about seemed to be Durgyu, the one with the pale skin. Durgyu glanced at him and complained about whether he had to go that far. The man in black with the evil blue eyes is none other than Li-han. Seeing that Mr. Durgyu's attitude had nothing to do with saying yes, Li-han immediately took off his hat, smiled and joked, "Is that not effective?" Guy Nandu next to him was startled and surprised by his appearance. He immediately reprimanded Li-han for knowing Durgyu, wondering why he said he was threatening him. Durgyu heard the reprimands from Guy Nandu. He immediately put his hands on his body and thought, teasing back, "How can a squirrel like you scare me? Nonsense." Guy Nandu immediately blushed and shouted loudly that he dared to call anyone a squirrel, but his blonde hair looked no different from squirrel fur. Li-han's hand needed the rope, advising Guy Nandu to calm down. Saying that, he pulled the string to tie the curtain, the light illuminating the dark room. The sunlight shining into the room made the people inside have to cover their eyes because it was too bright. Yoner is also wondering why we need to go so far. Seeing her ask that, Li-han turned to look at her with eyes as if he wanted to say something to her. He explained to Yoner but his eyes looked at Durgyu, thinking that because the tigers would misunderstand if Durgyu was friendly with us, Durgyu was already treated like an outcast. Durgyu's cheeks turned slightly red, asking Li-han again if he thought it was because of him. Yes, maybe they could have misunderstood. He put his hand to his mouth to think and then thanked Li-han. Li-han walked over and said it was nothing. His hand patted Durgyu's shoulder and especially let Durgyu become his mouse. Durgyu seemed dissatisfied with the mole name that Li-han gave him, frowning, his face slackening, thinking that this nickname was insulting to him. Li-han immediately went down and talked, thinking that he was going to tell me whether Marathi had any shady plans, but Durgyu didn't care about the question and instead asked. Durgyu only cared about whether Li-han had "Can I give you a more honorable and noble name?" Guy Nandu stood in the middle and was bored with the two of them. He shook his head and teased Durgyu, "Isn't that too appropriate for a rat?" Durgyu stood next to him with a sullen face, emitting anger. Guy Nandu immediately turned around and said yes, that was wrong. Li-han felt that it was okay to joke like that. He said that because of honor and justice, that name is really inappropriate. Yoner and Guy Nandu heard that and felt embarrassed for him. What is honor and justice? Li-han immediately pointed his finger and called out to Durgyu, declaring that from this moment on he would be the flute player, a role to face injustice alone. Durgyu was surprised when Li-han gave him a lesson to face injustice alone, a flute player. He was happy inside. This guy sounds cooler. He turned his hand to himself and said, "Okay, I'm the one playing the flute." Li-han and Durgyu shook hands, expressing that they were looking forward to the future flute player, and Durgyu was also happy and replied, "Of course, Li-han." Yoner thought to himself, what the hell did Li-han learn from his home? So, Li-han told everyone to get to the point. "The reason we gathered early on the weekend morning was because..." He hesitated for a long time and said it was because he wanted to make a plan to escape the academy. Guy Nandu and Yoner raised their hands and shouted happily, "Delicious," while Durgyu next to him was surprised to say something. Durgyu's face darkened and he seriously asked Li-han, "Are you serious?" Li-han immediately thought he would be like that, so I prepared 10 ways to convince him. Li-han immediately made a plan for everyone. Durgyu was first. Durgyu said suddenly. Unexpectedly, Durgyu thought. He also thought about escaping like that. Li-han asked, not understanding what was going on. In his mind, Durgyu's refusal was wrong. Even though they come from a noble knight family, they are still nobles. The tiger family has never once had an empty stomach. A student's stomach growled with hunger. We can't continue like this. The students shouted loudly, we have to go hunting. If the guys in the green tower can do it, then we can do it too. They think that with a few spells, we can all defeat them. A student immediately spoke up, okay, calm down. A group of students stood proudly by the door, acting like they were here. Jigel raised his hand and said, it's fine to go, but think about it, you guys think hunting here is easy. The one that Wadanaz hunted was a monster intentionally released by the alchemy professor. In the forest, if we want to hunt something like that, we have to go deep into the forest. Are you okay with that? The blue-haired boy immediately asked Jigel if there was any way. Giselle said firmly, yes. We will get out of the academy. Once again he assured his friends that we would not pay attention to that kind of meat anymore. Jigel's two student friends immediately became excited and asked if that was true. The blue-haired boy wondered if this was possible. She lifted her hair to her ear and confidently said she had a plan. While talking to his two friends, like his brother and sister, he turned around and asked if anyone wanted to follow. I also didn't want to find a way out alone. Everyone heard that. The students there shouted Math Omarati is the best. Suddenly he, but one click, made three of her close friends spray with glue. Then make suggestions. She will be the one to give instructions, and if you guys do something useless and ruin the plan, I won't let it go, she said with her eyes wide open, looking so scary. So many kilos of darkness surrounded her.